As a TV show, The Last of Us is successful. That probably comes as no surprise to those who are familiar with the 2013 cinematic action video game it is based on. The HBO TV series adaptation of the Naughty Dog-developed game, which is being helmed by the game's creative director and writer Neil Druckmann and writer and director Craig Mazin, adheres closely to the original version of the story, keeping many of its plot lines and key scenes the same and even verbatim reusing portions of dialogue and scene transitions. The HBO series is at its strongest and most interesting when it departs from its source material, but some of that departure also yields some of the show's weaker moments. This is coming from a viewer with intimate knowledge and affection for the video game The Last of Us. In any case, The Last of Us succeeds in forging a distinct identity for itself and feels like a worthwhile exploration of the original story. Grounded, Joel Miller, a survivor in a post-apocalyptic world where a parasitic fungus has transformed humans into zombie-like creatures, is tasked with bringing young adolescent Ellie across the country to a research facility run by a democratic resistance group. Joel is reluctant to get close to Ellie because he lost a child, but after going through a number of difficulties, the two eventually develop a close relationship. The Last of Us, Part I, which includes the standalone expansion, Left Behind, is the portion of the game that is covered in the HBO adaptation. We spend less time with Joel in the series than we do in the video game, so it's a good thing that he's a more emotionally nuanced character in the series. Although his violent side does surface in the second half of the season, more time is spent on exploring his psyche and humanity, and in the context of the 9 episodes, he comes across as a more sympathetic character. Of course, the adaptation's format and capacity to benefit from a natural detachment from the story of Joel and Ellie are its greatest strengths. The first scene of the series, which takes place in the 1960s, is one of many time and historical jumps made by The Last of Us to make the connections between historical events and character motivations more obvious. To great effect, many flashbacks are used, sometimes even entire episodes are removed from the main characters. All of this makes sense to someone who is familiar with the sequence of events in the 2 Last of Us games and contributes to the dynamic of the TV series' own compelling storyline. The origins, spread, and behavior of the fungal virus are examined in much more detail than in the source material, especially in the cold opens of the first 2 episodes, one of which takes place in Jakarta, in an arc performed entirely in Indonesian. The Chernobyl-inspired moments in the show are fantastic, and you can really feel the slow-burning tension of an impending catastrophe that the viewer is well aware of. Reclaiming a region. The HBO version of The Last of Us deviates from the storyline of the original game in a number of other ways, mostly in the episodes in the middle that are credited to Craig Mazin as the sole author. While Henry and Sam and Bill and Frank are the 2 main groups of survivors in these tales, the tone, style, and impact of each story differ significantly. One of the season's most memorable moments is unquestionably the dramatic expansion of the relationship between survivalist Bill and his companion Frank in the TV adaptation. In this dramatic and vulnerable role, Offerman excels, and Bartlett is a strong and endearing presence. The episode where they take center stage makes the entire adaptation project feel worthwhile. The story of brothers Henry and Sam also undergoes an intriguing reinterpretation because the younger Sam is now deaf, which adds a new layer and backstory to their relationship. But their story is also entwined with that of Kathleen, a head of a citizen militia that seizes power in Kansas City by toppling the authorities, while Linsky makes for a compelling antagonist, retaining the disarming, soft-spoken demeanor that barely conceals an ice-cold ruthlessness seen in previous roles. The subplot involving her, Henry, and Sam sees The Last of Us veer into a more familiar zombie fiction beat that ends up feeling more contrived than the other stories. Instead of meaningfully adding to the already established and much more memorable dramatic payoff of Sam and Henry's story, it appears that its purpose is to set up one of the few large-scale action set pieces of the show. On the other hand, the plotline that examines a previous romance between Ellie and her close friend Riley is remarkably faithful to Left Behind, the video game expansion content. In a similar vein, the plotline in which Ellie embarks on a solo journey through the dead of winter to find the town of Silver Lake is just as engrossing as it ever was. Bella Ramsey gets a chance to fully develop her role as Ellie in these arcs, and she excels at it. Bygones. The Last of Us dramatic conclusion doesn't quite feel as impactful as it should do, in part, to the last few episodes of Season 1 being so faithful to the source material. Considering the overall arc of the HBO version, it seems as though the series could have used a little more time to explore the development of Joel and Ellie's relationship. This could just be a personal experience brought on by my familiarity with the game. But when I think about the overall arc of the HBO version, I feel differently. These kinds of private moments are shown, but given the short 9-episode run of the show and the choice to explore stories unrelated to Joel and Ellie, the development of their ultimately unbreakable bond doesn't feel as believable as it might have. Throughout the season, there are quiet moments between the two, including several scenes of camping. It's a nice touch that the passing of time and the need for food, rest, and sleep is more acutely felt in these scenes than in the game. Throughout the season, the show frequently and obviously uses Joel's response to Joel and Ellie's infamous book of bad jokes, no pun intended, as a barometer to determine the status of their relationship. However, it wouldn't have hurt to have an additional episode that was primarily focused on their character conflict. And while The Last of Us uses Ellie's relationships with Riley and eventually Maria to examine the lives of girls and women in this primarily paternal post-apocalyptic tale, the HBO adaptation's portrayal of Tess, Joel's post-disaster companion and partner in crime, is a slight letdown. Torv gives a good dramatic performance, but unlike Tess in the game, who was a fiercely competitive and imposing figure who even surpassed Joel in grit, Tess in the HBO version never gets the chance to exhibit this side. Instead, it seems as though she is the key component for emphasizing age as a crutch in a survivalist setting, which makes her story seem less significant. And a little disappointing. The Last of Us in this iteration feels believable, original, and compelling as a standalone work of media, a show about finding something to live for when all hope is lost. However, there are a number of other new touches that significantly enhance the plot and characterization of these already well-established characters. The portrayal of Joel, Ellie, and the setting in which they live is strong, and the deviations from the original story are ultimately successful in enhancing this version of The Last of Us. Let's hope the rest of Joel and Ellie's story is handled similarly. Beginning January 15, 2023, The Last of Us will be available for streaming on HBO Max in the US and Binge in Australia. 4 out of 5 stars. In The Last of Us, Sony Pictures Television, PlayStation Productions, Word Games, The Mighty Mint, and Naughty Dog were involved in the production. Warner Bros., the distributor, TV production companies, Craig Mazin, Neil Druckmann, Carolyn Strauss, Evan Wells, Asad Kizilbash, Carter Swan, and Rose Lamb are the executive producers. Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin wrote the text. Release date, January 15, 2022. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and support my channel Lesser Than 3.